I first started going to the Middle East in 1983, I guess was really my first introduction to conflicts in the Middle East. I was traveling around Europe with a girlfriend, and a vacation gone awry. I ended up in Beirut in the summer of 1983, and got there just a few weeks before the American Marines were blown up at their barracks out at the Beirut airport. And from that, I became both fascinated by journalism, by conflict, and by the Middle East. And over the subsequent years, I kept going back to the Middle East. And by 1995, I was doing a lot of stories with Paolo Pellegrin, whose photographs you see here. In the summer of 2014, almost exactly 2 years ago, Paolo was in town. He lives in Italy. And we had dinner with Jake. And over the course of the dinner, we were talking about what kind of project we might work on, and recognizing so much had happened in the Middle East at this point. This was 4 years into the Arab Spring revolutions, and Jake came up with the idea that we would do something really big. We came up with the idea that we would tell this story through the experiences of a handful of people. In each case, I wanted to choose people who were quite different from each other, and who also had exceptional stories. They didn't have to be exceptional people, but their stories had to be, I felt, extraordinary, kind of case studies of the tumult and the violence and the turmoil that has swept through the Middle East over the past 13 years since the American invasion. And it's the story of how these 6 people confronted the dangers and challenges, sometimes through cunning, sometimes through bravery, and in some cases through cowardice, and how their experiences forever altered their lives. What story can I find to tell that's going to captivate readers, and then and hopefully teach them something about this place, on the edges of that.
The piece and the photographs, a lot of that reporting had already happened by the time our virtual reality initiative started. So, and the thing about VR is that you really need to be present in some situation and film action as it happens around the camera for it to be a very, very engaging virtual reality experience.
ISIS fighters are close by, only a few hundred meters away. We weren't sure how well this ragtag unit of the Shia militia, with mismatching uniforms and little organization, could protect us. Motez and I were nervous. Things were quiet. And then suddenly... Gunfire comes in right above our heads. You can hear the zinging of the bullets flying just past.
When we first got the footage back and started working with it, Ben Solomon, the video journalist who was in the field and directing, writing, and editing this piece, he did something really smart where he filmed himself walking around in the scenes in Fallujah. And I don't know if a lot of you have been watching some of the VR journalism out there, but usually people put the camera down and hide and pretend there's no one there making a film so that you feel fully immersed. But he had the foresight to interact with the environment so that we could create a piece that was in his words, explaining the scenes, and letting you really experience combat as a foreign correspondent might experience it.
We have done many stories about conflict. We've done many stories about the Arab world, many stories about the Middle East. We've done many stories with Scott and Paolo. And there were several things that made this story unique and special and as sort of high impact as it was. And of course, the main thing to be said about that is that made it that way is what Scott was able to put on the page and what Paolo was able to record with his camera. But it was also just the sort of audacity of this project to take over the whole issue of the magazine and not have any advertising in the issue, which gave it a certain impact, and to be able to invest as much time and energy and resources as we did, and obviously that simply wouldn't have been possible without the support of the Pulitzer Center. So we are extremely grateful to you guys. Thank you. And then the other thing, and maybe I'll let this kind of unfold as we get to the educational initiative, is that another aspect that makes this project special, I think, is that it is going to be taught in classrooms. I guess in some cases maybe already is, depending on when the school year starts. And that's incredibly gratifying for us as journalists. We were talking earlier today about how as journalists you often publish stuff and it goes out in the world and you have metrics, you have ways of understanding whether or not it's being read, but you don't have that many hard ways to understand whether people are actually learning anything from it. And so the idea that this project that Scott and Paolo spent so long on is actually being painstakingly and very thoughtfully taught according to these lesson plans that the Pulitzer Center has created, or this lesson plan builder that the Pulitzer Center has created is deeply gratifying to us, and we're grateful for that as well.
The response that we're getting from educators and that I felt in the education department looking at the piece is we're always looking for ways to, in the classroom and in communities as educators, and I think everyone in here could consider themselves an educator, and how do we question, how do we connect, how do we discover, how do we question, right? And sort of that cycle of encouraging that cycle of learning, where in this piece what we're seeing is a lot of historical information that is distant from many students that are in school right now. What we're finding is that in the middle school and high school levels, teachers are finding a lot of gaps in knowledge around the history here. And that's why this story is so important. And you know what, let's do some solidarity here. There was a lot of, research that the education department had to do. And what's important to think about here is the students are the experts in their experiences of this country, especially of their lives. And they're gonna see this history in a totally different way than anyone else. But we are going into classrooms where a lot of students aren't connecting to our country's role in the story here, how this story connects to their community. And so we're excited that not only do we have the lessons being built and do we have teachers starting to use them, but in the education department, we're going to be able to go with Scott to schools this fall and universities to begin to actually see how students are processing this story. So hopefully there'll be more information coming from us, but clearly you can see that this story is sparking great conversations in schools and communities.
Where were you when I was in high school?
How did the New York Times editorial team come to the conclusion in a time where social media and just the distraction of audiences has led to people basically just scanning headlines nowadays, that a piece over 40,000 words in length would actually be digested and understood and people would actually pay attention?
Well, we'd never published a story of quite this length before, and so I think the question was, how do we know that in an age of people having short attention spans that they would read the whole thing? And the answer is that we didn't, but the good news is that they did. So I'm very happy about that.
Compared to Scott, Paolo, and Ben, I am a casual journalist tourist to the Middle East. But in the years after 9/11, when I was still a correspondent for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, I spent months in the region, reporting on multiple trips to Iraq, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Lebanon, Sudan, Egypt, and Jordan. I was profoundly struck by the disconnect between what I was seeing on the ground and the conventional wisdom back in Washington. A conventional wisdom that embraced not only both political parties, but also much of the reporting we saw in our leading news outlets. And when I asked members of the Pulitzer family for the funding to start what became the Pulitzer Center, part of my case was the crucial importance of acting to ensure that in future crises, we would hear from more voices with more independence, contributing to a more informed public debate on the big issues that affect us all.